The first speaker was her Uncle Tom. She knew the naive candour, covering the girding and savage misery of his soul. Who was the other speaker? Whose voice ran on so easy, yet with an inflamed pulse? It seemed to hasten and urge her forward, that other voice. "I remember you," the young man's voice was saying. "I remember you from the first time I saw you, because of your dark eyes and fair face." Mrs. Brangwen laughed, shy and pleased. "You were a curly-headed little lad," she said. "Was I? Yes, I know. They were very proud of my curls." And her laugh ran to silence. "You were a very well-mannered lad, I remember," said her father. "Oh, did I ask you to stay the night? I always used to ask people to stay the night. I believe it was rather trying for my mother." There was a general laugh. Ursula rose. She had to go. At the click of the latch everybody looked round. The girl hung in the doorway, seized with a moment's fierce confusion. She was going to be good-looking. Now she had an attractive gawkiness, as she hung a moment, not knowing how to carry her shoulders. Her dark hair was tied behind her. Her yellow-brown eyes shone without direction. Behind her, in the parlour, was the soft light of a lamp upon open books. A superficial readiness took her to her Uncle Tom, who kissed her, greeting her with warmth, making a show of intimate possession of her, and at the same time leaving evident his own complete detachment. But she wanted to turn to the stranger. He was standing back a little, waiting. He was a young man with very clear, greyish eyes, that waited until they were called upon, before they took expression. Something in his self-possessed waiting moved her, and she broke into a confused, rather beautiful laugh as she gave him her hand, catching her breath like an excited child. His hand closed over hers, very close, very near. He bowed, and his eyes were watching her with some attention. She felt proud. Her spirit leapt to life. "You don't know Mr. Skrebensky, Ursula?" came her Uncle Tom's intimate voice. She lifted her face with an impulsive flash to the stranger, as if to declare a knowledge, laughing her palpitated, excited laugh. His eyes became confused with roused lights. His detached attention changed to a readiness for her. He was a young man of 21, with a slender figure and soft brown hair brushed up on the German fashion, straight from his brow. "Are you staying long?" she asked. "I've got a month's leave," he said, glancing at Tom Brangwen. "But I've various places I must go to. Put in some time here and there." He brought her a strong sense. "What have you a month's leave from?" she asked. "I'm in the Engineers, in the army." "Oh!" she exclaimed, glad. "We're taking you away from your studies," said her Uncle Tom. "Oh no," she replied quickly. Skrebensky laughed, young and inflammable. "She won't wait to be taken away," said her father. But that seemed clumsy. She wished he would leave her to say her own things. "Don't you like study?" asked Skrebensky, turning to her, putting the question from his own case. "I like some things," said Ursula. "I like Latin and French, and grammar." He watched her, and all his being seemed attentive to her. Then he shook his head. "I don't," he said. "They say all the brains of the army are in the Engineers. I think that's why I joined them, to get the credit of other people's brains." He said this quizzically, and with chagrin. And she became alert to him. It interested her. Whether he had brains or not, he was interesting. His directness attracted her, motion. She was aware of the movement of his life over against hers. "I don't think brains matter," she said. "What does matter, then?" came her Uncle Tom's intimate, caressing, half-jeering voice. She turned to him. "It matters whether people have courage or not," she said. "Courage for what?" asked her uncle. "For everything." Tom Brangwen gave a sharp little laugh. The mother and father sat silent, with listening faces. Skrebensky waited. She was speaking for him. "Everything's nothing," laughed her uncle. She disliked him at that moment. "She doesn't practise what she preaches," said her father, stirring in his chair and crossing one leg over the other. "She has courage for mighty little." But she would not answer. Skrebensky sat still, waiting. His face was irregular, almost ugly, flattish, with a rather thick nose. But his eyes were pellucid, strangely clear. His brown hair was soft and thick as His skin was fine, his figure slight, beautiful. Beside him her Uncle Tom looked full-blown, her father seemed uncouth. Yet he reminded her of her father, only he was finer, and he seemed to be shining, and his face was almost ugly. He seemed simply acquiescent in the fact of his own being, as if he were beyond any change or question. He was himself. There was a sense of fatality about him that fascinated her. He made no effort to prove himself to other people. Let it be accepted for what it was, his own being. In its isolation it made no excuse or explanation for itself. So he seemed perfectly, even fatally established. He did not ask to be rendered before he could exist, before he could have relationship with another person. This attracted Ursula very much. She was so used to unsure people who took on a new being with every new influence. Her Uncle Tom was always more or less what the other person would have him. In consequence, one never knew the real Uncle Tom, only a fluid, unsatisfactory flux with a more or less consistent appearance. But, let Skrebensky do what he would, betray himself entirely, he betrayed himself always upon his own responsibility. He permitted no question about himself. He was irrevocable in his isolation. So Ursula thought him wonderful. He was so finely constituted, and so distinct, self-contained, self-supporting. This, she said to herself, was a gentleman. He had a nature like fate, the nature of an aristocrat. She laid hold of him at once for her dreams. Here was one such as those sons of God, who saw the daughters of men, that they were fair. He was no son of Adam. Adam was servile. Had not Adam been driven, cringing, out of his native place? Had not the Adam been driven, cringing, out of his native place? Had not the human race been a beggar ever since, seeking its own being? But Anton Skrebensky could not beg. He was in possession of himself, of that, and no more. Other people could not really give him anything, nor take anything from him. His soul stood alone. She knew that her mother and father acknowledged him. The house was changed. There had been a visit paid to the house. Once 3 angels stood in Abraham's doorway and greeted him, and stayed and ate with him, leaving his household enriched forever when they went. The next day she went down to the marsh according to invitation. The 2 men were not come home. Then, looking through the window, she saw the dog-cart drive up, and Skrebensky leapt down. She saw him draw himself together, jump, laugh to her uncle who was driving, then come towards her to the house. He was so spontaneous and revealed in his movements. He was isolated within his own clear, fine atmosphere, and as still as if fated. His resting in his own fate gave him an appearance of indolence, almost of languor. He made no exuberant movement. When he sat down he seemed to go loose, languid. "We are a little late," he said. "Where have you been?" "We went to Derby to see a friend of my father's." "Who?" It was an adventure to her to put direct questions and get plain answers. She knew she might do it with this man. "Why, he's a clergyman too. He is my guardian, one of them." Ursula knew that Skrebensky was an orphan. "Where is really your home now?" she asked. "My home? I wonder. I am very fond of my Colonel, Colonel Hepburn. Then there are my aunts, but my real home, I suppose, is the army. Do you like being on your own?" His clear, greenish-grey eyes rested on her a moment, and, as he considered her, "I suppose so," he said. "You see, my father, well, he was never acclimatised here. He wanted, I don't know what he wanted, but it was a strain. And my mother, I always knew she was too good to me. I could feel her being too good to me. My mother! Then I went away to school so early, and I must say the outside world was always more naturally a home to me than the vicarage. I don't know why." "Do you feel like a bird blown out of its own latitude?" she asked, using a phrase she had met. "No, no. I find everything very much as I like it." He seemed more and more to give her a sense of the vast world, a sense of distances and large masses of humanity. It drew her as a scent draws a bee from afar, but also it hurt her. It was summer, and she wore cotton frocks. The 3rd time he saw her she had a dress on with fine blue and white stripes, with a white collar, and a large white hat. It suited her golden, warm complexion. "I like you best in that dress," he said, standing with his head slightly on one side, and appreciating her in a perceiving, critical fashion. She was thrilled with a new life. For the first time she was in love with a vision of herself. She saw, as it were, a fine little reflection of herself in his eyes. And she must act up to this. She must be beautiful. Her thoughts turned swiftly to clothes. Her passion was to make a beautiful appearance. Her family looked on in amazement at the sudden transformation of Ursula. She became elegant, really elegant, in figured cotton frocks she made for herself, and hats she bent to her fancy. An inspiration was upon her. He sat with a sort of languor in her grandmother's rocking chair, rocking slowly, languidly, backward and forward, as Ursula talked to him. "You're not poor, are you?" she said. "Poor in money? I have about 100 So I am poor or rich, as you like. I am poor enough, in fact. But you will earn money. I shall have my pay. I have my pay now. I've got my commission. That is another 150. You will have more, though. I shan't have more than £200 a year for 10 years to come. I shall always be poor, if I have to live on my pay. Do you mind it? Being poor? Not now. Not very much. I may later. People, the officers, are good to me. Colonel Hepburn has a sort of fancy for me. He is a rich man, I suppose." A chill went over Ursula. Was he going to sell himself in some way? "Is Colonel Hepburn married?" "Yes, with 2 daughters." But she was too proud at once to care whether Colonel Hepburn's daughter wanted to marry him or not. There came a silence. Gudrun entered, and Skrebensky still rocked languidly on the chair. "You look very lazy," said Gudrun. "I am lazy," he answered. "You look really floppy," she said. "You look really floppy," she said. "I am floppy," he answered. "Can't you stop?" asked Gudrun. "No, it's the perpetuum mobile." "You look as if you hadn't a bone in your body." "That's how I like to feel." "I don't admire your taste." "That's my misfortune." And he rocked on.